In a future where reviews are outlawed, reviewers will become heroes. Let's talk about Equilibrium.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Daniel, would you like to let the people know what we're discussing today?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week we are talking about Equilibrium, which is a 2002 dystopian science fiction movie, which is about a future set after World War III. The survivors of that war have created a society in which all emotions are being suppressed with a drug. And the story follows John Preston, who is a grammaton cleric, which is a kind of religious elite police officer whose job it is to track down people who are hoarding banned art, which is banned because it evokes emotions and which is illegal. And so their job is to find people who are hiding banned pieces of art, track them down, destroy the art, and protect the system in this way. And the story follows him when one day he forgets to take his dose of the drug, which suppresses his emotions. When those emotions come back to the surface for the first time in a long time, he is beginning to question everything he has believed and everything he has ever done. The story then unfolds from there. So Equilibrium is kind of like, this was not a successful movie. This made $5 million at the box office against a $20 million budget. It's not well reviewed. It did not get a good reception at the time when it came out. And it's not one of those movies that get reassessed after 20 years and everybody realizes how much ahead of their time they were. This is just a pretty mediocre action sci-fi movie from the early 2000s. The reason that I picked it for this is that when I was first discovering movies in the early 2000s, this would have been 2003, 4, we were completely shut off from kind of like, this was pre-internet, and I was also living overseas. And so we kind of just found bootleg DVDs like in boxes, like in little shops. And we just watched whatever they sold, and we watched new movies, old movies, big blockbusters, small movies nobody had ever heard of. And some of these things we kind of latched on, and there wasn't big, and because this, like, the internet was in its very early days during that time, there wasn't really a discourse. There was nowhere to go to find out what we were supposed to think about a movie. And Equilibrium was one of these movies that we discovered and watched, and it blew our minds at 16. And in our minds, we kind of filed it under, like, in one bucket with The Matrix, right? So philosophical action, science fiction, cool action scenes, big philosophical ideas, whatever. And I was kind of surprised later on, after a few years, when I found out that actually Equilibrium is pretty bad, or it's widely regarded as pretty bad. But in my heart, whenever I watch it, I'm back 2003 on the couch with my friends, thinking The Gun Cutter was the most amazing thing ever. So my question to you, you just saw this for the first time, right?
Correct, yes.
And you had never heard of it before either, right? So you were going into this completely fresh.
I had no clue what I was about to watch, to be honest. But when I saw Christian Bale was in it, I was like, okay, I've got some hope for this movie.
Yeah, like Sean Bean is in it. I think Emily Watson is a decently large name. You know, these are real actors, right? Playing in this fairly low budget, schlocky sci-fi movie. And we'll get to the cast a little bit and, the performances and whatever. But just watching this completely blind in 2025 with no bias and no previous expectations, what did you think of Equilibrium?
This movie is fantastic. This movie is great. Honestly, at first, when I was getting into it, I was a little bit confused as to kind of what was going on, what I was watching. I think there was like, and I don't know whether it was just the cut that I was watching, but there was like a long pause where they're fighting the rebels, and then there's like a long like cut to black scene before Christian Bale's character kind of, goes off and starts showing off all his gun skills. But in that little pause, I was really like, okay, what's going on? This is a bit, strange or whatever. But once the action got going in there, I was like, this is wild. I was like, this is so, like, what he's doing is, it looks like it shouldn't be good, and it looks like it should just be like really cringy, the way he's like moving his hands about and just like shooting everyone like 600 times and stuff. But for whatever reason, I got such a kick out of the action, and anytime there was any action in this, it was just completely thrilling. I was just so immersed in it. And then you have the whole premise of the movie, which you described for the people. And I always like things like that. I always like things where you're kind of chucked into, it's a normal world, but the rules of society is, something that's completely out of whack and something that's completely so far left or right that it's like you couldn't possibly conceive it, but this movie is going to show you what it's like and how people live in this society. So a similar thing to that is something like The Handmaid's Tale, where they have a society where they need these women to get pregnant. And if you've seen it, it's a great first couple of seasons of that show. But back to this movie, I was like, okay, this is interesting. A world without feelings and emotion because they were blamed for, why we had so many wars in the past. You can quite clearly see how oppressive and how dominating and controlling the organization that he worked for was. You kind of know what you're gonna get from the movie in terms of, okay, you've got this person who seems so by the books and seems to believe so much in what his cause is, and then you're gonna go on a journey with this character to slowly unravel his mindset on it and slowly unravel his way of thinking to sympathize with the rebels and the people that are trying to still feel or still get some emotion in this world. So it was something that I was going to follow. It was something that I kind of expected in terms of how the story was going to play out, but it was still very interesting. It was still, a lot of the character dynamics between Preston and his news and the body cop, even the small moments between, like Preston and his kids and when they're going after the rebels and stuff like that. It was all just really great, really engaging, and just really fun to watch, to be honest.
Yeah, so I'm actually kind of surprised that you like it so much, because this is peak early 2000s try-hard edgelord stuff, right? Like the gun kata and everybody's a stoic badass and the martial arts and just the entire aesthetic. Like, I thought this was amazing at 16, right? And like watching it at the time. But I think for me, this is one of those things that has not aged very well. Not because there's necessarily anything wrong with it. It's more like it's a little bit try-hard teenager, right?
For me, the reason why I liked it so much is that I just enjoyed the absurdity of it. So the absurdity of everyone being dead serious and the absurdity of the mechanics of the way that they were fighting. I don't know. It just kind of, it just had, I don't know. It just kind of got me excited. I don't know why. And I think in part of the absurdity as well, in part of the stoic badass stuff, I kind of found the humor in it, especially in the scenes where I think it got even better was when Christian Bale was off of the suppressant drug and was having to fake it or was having to still put on the act to try and mask that he was feeling emotion. I think even in those scenes, it was even better for me. It was just great to watch. So I get why people would say it's teenage badassery and kind of like edgelord stuff, but I don't know. I think there's a lot of fun to be had in it.
Yeah, and that was kind of a little bit my experience too, like watching it this weekend. It's like, it's stupid, it's silly, it's pretentious, and I'm having a good time. It's just they put so much effort into it and it's so earnest. And it's like, but it's not even that impressive, right? They ultimately just stand in the middle of the room and kind of do this, right? Like they kind of point their guns in like predetermined directions and they hit everybody. You know what I mean? Like the choreography is not that impressive. It's not that thought through. Doesn't impress you with anything special. It's literally just saying, hey, we've used statistics to analyze gunfights, and this is where the enemy is, and this is where the bullets go, so we're just gonna not stand, and then we don't get hit. It's kind of what's going on here, right?
It's very stupid. Again, it's very stupid. And seeing it for the first time, I was a bit like, okay, what's going on here? But the more you see it and the more it happens, the more it just sucks you into the world. And I think that's what the movie does really well, actually. It just brings you into, its world. The believability of it, I think because everyone takes it so seriously. In a modern movie, I feel like a lot of it would be undercut by maybe some jokes or comic relief or things like that. But because this movie is so serious about what it's trying to do and it's so serious about the action and the gunfight and stuff, you just can't help but just fall into it. You can't help but fall into the world and just take everything they're doing a little bit more seriously, even though it's completely silly and even though it's like you said, it's not really that impressive choreography. But when he's just standing in between like six or eight people and he's just firing off his gun and his hands are going back and forth to all the people, it just worked for me.
There's like the scene when he confronts father. He throws magazines into the hallway, and because they're weighted at the bottom, they kind of stand upright. And they land exactly where he will end up when he runs out of ammo. So that he just needs to reach down and he's reloaded, right? Because statistically, because the gun cutter is so precise, he knows exactly where he will be when he runs out of bullets. And that was like a thing in the early 2000s as well, where people really fetishize this kind of like, you can science, like there's no limit to what science can do. Like there's no limit to what you can predict with statistics and human behavior and all of that, right? That was an idea that was kind of out there in a whole bunch of different shows. I really like the show Numbers, which ran in kind of the mid 2000s, which was about this police officer who's kept bringing in his mathematician brother to solve cases. And each case would be solved by applying some mathematical principle that had nothing to do with the case. It was just like everything is math, and once you understand the math, you understand the world, you can control it. Like that's kind of just a thing that was out there in the 2000s, something people thought was cool, and this is kind of reflected here, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think maybe the reason that particular scene, I didn't take that away from me, was because it didn't really feel like they were counting bullets. It just kind of felt like they were spraying bullets everywhere. And then it felt a bit convenient that he needed to reload at that particular time, because at no other point did it kind of show him counting bullets or preserving bullets or whatever. And he had like a small pistol, but he was firing off so many shots. So I get the whole sort of science aspect behind it, but I don't know. As a first-time viewer, it didn't register to me that that's what he was doing. It just kind of seemed like it was convenient at the time. But of course, that kind of fits in with the training and fits in with what was described in the movie.
One more thing that's a little bit silly, or maybe not the greatest aspect of the movie, is the world building of this, right? So how this world is constructed, what we are shown about how this society works, and which kind of creates the backdrop to why is art banned, why do they have special police units to track down hidden caches of art. Somebody was really proud of themselves for coming up with the word sense offender. Do you pick up on that?
Yeah, I was a bit like, this is a bit too close to the other word. I was like, okay, they're treading a line.
Well, that's the point, right? Like somebody thought of that in the shower, scribbled this down furiously, and then pitched it at the next meeting and said, we have to use this. This is great. This is amazing world building. But again, it ties into this idea that it's so stupid, but it's presented in a completely honest way. And for that reason, like everybody just acts as if this term was normal and meaningful, and therefore it is, right? Like we kind of had this in other movies too. Like some of my favorite movies we've discussed in the series, like Stargate, Hellboy, Pacific Rim, a few others, right? They all are extremely silly. They take their silliness incredibly seriously, and as a result, it works. And it wouldn't work if they pointed out the silliness of it, or if they were self-conscious about it, or if it was embedded in jokes, right? This whole bathos idea, right? Bathos is like when you build up tension and then you undermine it with a joke. That's a form of kind of relieving tension, but it's like that's kind of what we now know as Marvel humor, right? Because Marvel started doing this years ago, and no character was ever allowed to have an earnest, serious moment because of this. And this is the exact opposite, right? This is just completely serious 100% of the way through. The silliest and most ridiculous ideas are taken completely seriously. And I think it works better because of that, right? And then we have got like this world building. It's basically just a 1984 pastiche, right? Like the way, like the gray brutalism, there's even these 5 minutes of hate, right? In 1984, you have these 5 minutes of hate where people are basically allowed to hate. Like they're shown like video of a regime enemy, and they're allowed to hate that person because the government has told them it's safe to hate that person right now. And that's kind of like a public act of catharsis because everybody else is so repressed and too afraid to show their emotions. And they kind of copied that here. Like there's no real like they're not hating, but they are kind of like there's kind of a similar dynamic, right? Where they are basically shown the enemies of the regime, and it's clearly referencing 1984, right? Then Father is very much Big Brother. The people who are censoring the art is very much like the censorship in 1984. The flag is just outright a Nazi flag, right? Like it's like every dystopian regime you've ever seen. The red, black, and white colors that are just different enough from a Nazi flag to not be an issue, but it's clearly that, right? Like nobody has ever come up with another symbol for bad people than the Nazi flag. So it's like, it's completely basic, like in the way it constructs this dystopia, right? There's even like the slums where kind of like in 1984, you've got the proles, and I forget what they call them here, but there's like this underclass of people who are not part of the society. They're not on the drugs. They're outside the control of Father and of the regime, but they're kind of living in these slums and there's this underclass. So it is lifting word for word large chunks of 1984, right? But I don't know. I don't know that that's a really an issue.
So I haven't seen 1984, and maybe a movie that we do one day, but I do agree with you that a lot of it felt quite basic in terms of, your typical symbolisms of the regime, the flag, what it represents, etc. And I can maybe go a little bit further than that as well, just in terms of the overall world building. In that, whilst part of it sucked me into the world, and how serious everything was taken, and how the movie took itself quite seriously in there. But I kind of felt like we had too much of Preston's perspective on everything in this movie, and I didn't really feel like I kind of understood the rebellion really well. I didn't quite understand the downside of why the suppressant drug was completely bad for for everyone, for the people that were working under those conditions, for the people that maybe weren't cleric and just had regular jobs within the regime and stuff, and even people that didn't work directly for the regime, because it kind of felt like everyone had like one work location and everyone worked for the regime, and there wasn't a wider scope as to kind of what was going on and sort of how it felt for the day-to-day person. Because what does the suppressant drug do to someone that owns a bookstore, or like a local supermarket, or something like that? I don't know. And those are probably some dumb examples, but it just kind of felt like we didn't get that type of outlook on just kind of like day-to-day people, and on the ground level, how this world works and why the suppressant drug was meant to benefit society, and essentially why it's a good thing, or why is it a bad thing. I don't know. I just kind of felt like a little bit of that was missing for me in the movie.
Yeah, one of the differences to 1984 is that in 1984 we are following relatively average people, right? Like the protagonist of 1984 is like a censor, right? He basically redacts newspaper articles all day. And here we are looking at this elite badass cop, part investigator, part SWAT guy, right?
Can I just say, I actually did like that we had his perspective in this, because it almost felt like similar to what they almost did in Star Wars, where you had Finn as a stormtrooper that defected, and you could have told a really interesting story from someone that came from within and was potentially high up in the Star Wars universe. But here I quite like that he was someone that was like so high in the system, so deep in his faith, and so deep in his belief in what he was doing, and then seeing that slowly fade away, and like his change, and him slowly starting to wake up. So I do give praise to the movie for that. But continue what you were saying.
There's nothing wrong with it, exactly, right? That's the story that's being told, and that totally fits. But it doesn't mean we don't see the ground level, right? We don't really see the society functioning. What it also doesn't do is really make a case for what a society without emotions looks like. Like everybody has these really strict hairstyles and wears gray and has these emotionless expressions on their face. But that's kind of it. Nobody really thought through what a society looks like in which people don't feel anything. And it's not just about people not smiling, right? And people not having fun, or people feeling emotions at listening to music or something. It's also wanting anything, right? Like, why do people get up, up and work in the morning other than being forced to? Why have families? Why care for your children? Why do anything, right? Like, all of these are emotions, because that relates to stuff we want. And what does a society look like in which nobody wants anything? Because that's ultimately a very, like, the most basic emotion. And I don't think the movie really does anything to really explore that idea at all. It just purely focused on the idea of beauty, right? Specifically as evoked by art, which it's not the worst, right? This is clearly referencing Fahrenheit 451, right? Where reading is banned, right? In order to control the population, and firefighters are book burners, right? That's what that is about. So all of that is kind of name checked or referenced in some way. But every time I watch Equilibrium, I'm a little bit frustrated that there is no real thesis for why emotions are so bad. It kind of just takes it for granted that emotions means war. And without emotions, there are no wars. Like, you could say that is something, like, that is a story the government tells to control people, and people buy into it. It is not really true. But it's like, what does a society actually look like? What does a human life actually look like when you are in this state? right?
No, for sure. I definitely agree with that. And that was going to be one of my questions that I had coming into this, because for me, the entire time watching this movie, it felt like the movie was trying to say something or had an idea as to, wanting to say something. But I felt like as a first time viewer, I was missing the point, or I was missing the whole idea of an expressionless and an emotionless society, and taking the joy away from life. And of course, you have that scene between Preston and the female prisoner in this movie, where she talks about love and like how was you made, and what gets you up, and stuff like that. But I don't know, and like it felt like I was missing some context, or I was missing the idea of the movie.
We don't really see somebody who really believes in the system, who will really defend it, and who is like a true believer, and who will argue the case, right? It's just stated multiple times throughout the movie. There's no like revolutionary guard, like people who live this ideology and are trying to make everybody else conform, right? Like that could have been interesting, where we kind of see a contrast between average people and the real fanatics, for example, which we kind of sort of see, but not really.
What would have been interesting, actually, and I thought, well, I kind of missed the twist in the movie, was his son, because for however many years his how old his son is, he had been programming him or feeding him the same information that he'd been getting fed, and teaching him to follow the ways of the regime and the people in charge. So it would have been interesting for possibly his son to be that, because then you have that realization that everything that he is and everything that he believes is because of me, and because of this backwards way of thinking that everyone needs to be emotionless. And that would have been a good foil for him, or a good other perspective of that side, of like someone that truly believes it, and someone that is so diehard on it.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe it was a mistake to make the son somebody who is also skipping doses, right? He says he stopped taking his dose when his mother died, which I'm not sure that makes a whole lot of sense, because if he has never felt, if he has never known a world with emotion, how would he know that he was supposed to mourn her, right? It's at minimum underdeveloped, I think. And I think if the son had been the true believer, and who maybe had been the real antagonist of the story, like somebody who is so far gone, who is so brainwashed, who is so convinced of the system that he can, like Preston cannot reach him, and that he basically has to, like by starting the rebellion, he has to kind of become the enemy of his own son. That would have been a cool story. I don't know. It's like the entire thing feels a little bit underbaked. It's almost like the script takes it for granted that obviously suppressing your emotions is bad, which who's going to disagree with that, right? But that's kind of the point, that you kind of have to think through, like, what does the belief system actually look like? What do daily lives actually look like? How is anything structured? What incentives do people use to get anybody to do anything? Is everything at the point of a gun, or is there something else, right? I don't know. Like it's
Yeah.
just something that I never really thought was really quite there.
Yeah, and on the Sun, the only thing that I could possibly say to kind of counter that, not that I do agree with you on it, but just as a counterpoint for the sake of the conversation, one thing I did see was, because the drug was a suppressant, is that there was certain human emotions that were just too strong, that even if you didn't feel it all the way, it did surface, because the drug only suppressed it and didn't completely block out all emotions. So something like losing your mother and watching her and not watching her die, but knowing that she'd passed away, maybe unlocked something in that person that maybe they wanted to feel a little bit more. So that's the only thing I can say for the movie. But again, I do agree with you that it's half baked, it's not well thought through, and I do feel like there was many instances in this movie where you could kind of see that people showing emotion when they were meant to be emotionless. Primarily Preston's boss, I feel like, had quite a bit of emotions in a lot of the scenes that he was in.
Also, Brand, like at the in the final confrontation, where Brand kind of thinks he has Preston outmaneuvered, and has exposed him. Why is he smiling?
No, exactly. Because he shouldn't be. He shouldn't really feel any emotion about this. And why? Again, it's that one that was meant to be suppressed, but he wants that promotion. He wants to elevate his career, and he's going to do that using Preston's name. So it doesn't quite track with
Yeah.
the premise they set for the movie.
Yeah, ambition is an emotion too.
Yeah. So I feel like whilst I do enjoy the movie and I actually do hold it in high regard, and it's actually just an entertaining watch, when you do dig into the plot, when you do dig into the premise of the movie and the idea of it and how it plays out across the whole movie, there's definitely a lot of holes and there's definitely a lot of areas where you're like, you could have probably worked on this a little bit more. You could have probably spent a little bit more time showing us the full perspective, showing us again, because it's not a small thing, you know, when you're departing so far from what is deemed normal in society, where you have a completely emotionless society where no one is able to feel emotion. You have to really show what the society is like, and you have to cover as many angles and as many aspects of it in the movie that you can, you know, that obviously makes sense for the movie and the plot and stuff like that. But I feel like we're just lacking so much of that in this movie.
And I think that is what's interesting, right? This whole, how do you sell people on this? Like, I can kind of imagine a world in which the devastation of World War III was so complete that people would have done anything to stop it, to prevent it from happening again. And somebody comes along and says, "Hey, like, this is the problem, and I've got, I've got the cure for this problem. And if you do what I say, you will never suffer through this again." I can see the appeal of that, right? But it's now a generation later, at least, if not more. And like, the people who now live in this world should view things in a way that either buys into it, or where they realize it's not really true, but they have to do it anyway because the system is constructed in such a way that they have to comply. And if they don't, that's too dangerous for them, right? I don't know, like, something's not quite there.
Also, the rebellion as well. I feel like they were really underserved in this movie in terms of, again, when you have a society that's about to make a decision to completely go the opposite direction and, you know, completely change up the rules of society and how things operate, of course, you're going to have those dissenting voices. And they're not all going to be lowly figures. They're not all going to be, you know, the bottom class of society. You know, you'll have, you know, people in power, you'll have politicians, you'll have X, Y, and Z who probably also oppose the direction that the people in control want to go in. But I don't feel like we really got a sense as to, you know, who they were, why they were formed, who, you know, a good sense of like the leaders of the rebellion and essentially what they were trying to achieve. It was just, again, just something that wasn't thought all the way through as to the story of the rebellion and what their whole deal is.
And there's also the question of what's the point? Like, what's the big message at the end? Is it just that emotions and art are good and we shouldn't neglect them? Okay, what else you got? Right? It's a little bit basic.
Even the whole, like, if you try to look at it through the lens of you need to experience life and feel and appreciate the little things, because there was a lot of emphasis on just like touching things and like having that sensation of feeling things, whether it's through like your hands, your eyes. It was like, okay, like, you know, what more is there that you're trying to say from this movie? To be fair, I was actually kind of hoping that we come into this discussion and I pick up on stuff that I was missing in the plot and in the story and, you know, in the message I was trying to tell, but it just kind of seems like it wasn't. So it does bring the movie down a little bit for me because of that, but I still had a good time overall.
Yeah, it may well be that there's some kind of subtext that I've never picked up on, but I think it's pretty straightforward. Like, it really is like the government is trying to get you to suppress your feelings. You're becoming a cog in a machine. You are not living on your own terms. You're not fully human. And here's the rebellion to break the system, and then you can be like a full human again. Which is a fine setup, right? But I don't think there is that much to it. There is kind of the hypocrisy of the leadership, right? Where it's revealed that father is not only fake, he's also not on prosium, right? So the guy, like the guy who, like, the figurehead of this belief system that gets everybody to suppress their emotions, is a hypocrite, right? He's not doing it himself, and it didn't feel like they kind of did very much with that either. It's more like, of course, the bad guy is a hypocrite.
Yeah, I was a little bit, well, I was going to say I was a little bit unsure, but no, there was like a point where I was like, okay, no, it seems like he isn't on this suppressant drug, because it was like clearly showing too much emotion. But I don't know what to say on that. It's just like another angle of the movie. I kind of feel bad for this movie now, because the more we're talking about it, the more it's coming down in my estimation in terms of, you know, how much I liked it. Because it's becoming clear that it's one of those movies where you watch it, it's exhilarating, it's fun, you have a great time with it, and then you step away from it and you start to actually think about the movie and you're like, this doesn't really make sense. And I think that's another, not that it doesn't make sense, but it isn't as developed and it doesn't go the places you want it to go, or it doesn't really go anywhere anyways. And again, that's another example of it, because how do the rest of the people feel? It just kind of, again, it's not like anyone questions him. It's not like anyone even challenges him on it. It's more just for the audience to see that he is a bit of a hypocrite. And of course, the people in charge are telling you what to do, are saying that you should do this, that, and the other, but they don't follow it themselves. And I mean, anyone that's kind of into politics or into whatever, you kind of know this stuff already. You had the whole stuff with the COVID parties in the UK and stuff like that when everyone was in lockdown. So I mean, there's real world examples of it, but it was just a bit like they didn't really go anywhere with it.
And I mean, we have a whole bunch of people who don't take the drug and who are secretly hoarding art, seem to be all over the place, right? There's Mary, who is like in custody for most of the movie and kind of challenges Preston's conscience a little bit. Then his wife was convicted of being a sex offender, right? The Sean Bean character, Ryle Partridge, he also kept sneaking out contraband art whenever they did a raid, right? So these people seem to be all over the place. Like the son and the daughter are off the drugs. So that kind of raises the question of how many people are actually on drugs, right? And there's this principle in totalitarianism where it's not the government's job to control everybody at all times. The mission is to make everybody feel like they're alone. Like they're the only ones who are not with the program. They're the only ones who have, there must be something wrong with them because they don't see what everybody else sees. They don't believe what everybody else believes. And it makes people very frustrated, very depressed, very lonely, and it prevents them from reaching out to other people, right? Because anybody, like if you open up to the wrong person, that can destroy your life in these regimes. And that kind of seems to be what's happening here, is that there are a lot of people who are not on Prosium, right? Like we've got like half a dozen people at least in the story, like major people in the story, and they're all alone. I think the only ones who know about each other are the son and daughter, but everybody else thinks they're the only one.
But do they though? Because when they first arrested the woman and they break down the wall and they see the entire collection, she almost has like an entire room of art and furniture and stuff. And it's like the guy was like, "You're clearly working with someone. There clearly is a network. We're going to find the people that you are working with." So it felt like there was this black market or underground market where people are working together and are working. Actually, how do you even like ship this stuff into people's house? Like, how do you even get like a whole like couch or a chandelier and stuff into people's houses?
I kind of figured that people just hid it when the government cracked down. Like everybody had the stuff in their houses, and at some point everybody had to turn it in. But a lot of people just kept some stuff, right? They kind of walled in a room, and that room has all the paintings and the nice furniture, and they basically handed in whatever it was they had to hand in to avoid suspicion. That's kind of like there's why there are these rooms full of art and furniture and carpets and all of that, right? You're right. You can't really transport it, so I imagine that there's just a whole bunch of places like houses that have like a hidden room or a basement where people kept this stuff and have kind of hidden it from the regime.
But then that just makes Preston's line. Granted, he was trying to mask that he was feeling emotions, but then it just doesn't make it make sense in the fact that no one questioned she could potentially be working with a network of people smuggling this stuff into a house and into potentially other people's homes. It just kind of contradicts that line, but again, it would make sense that if you've got a crackdown and you want to try and retain some stuff, that you would take those steps to put a wall up or whatever, especially if you have time knowing that it's coming at a certain point.
There must have been a transition period, right, where like this didn't happen from one day to the next, probably, right? This happened over the course of a couple of years, probably, and so a whole bunch of stuff got hidden away. And you're absolutely right that there is an underground, there's a resistance. People are helping each other, but there are also characters who are just alone, right? So, for instance, Preston didn't know that his wife was off Prosium, for example, and she just lived she hid this from her own family. And one day, like the government just shows up and grabs her, and everybody is shocked by it, right? Because they didn't know. Preston didn't know this about Partridge, right? His first partner, who has been feeling the entire time. And there's this one small moment where it slips a little bit, where he accidentally misspeaks and kind of shows an emotion, and he covers it up very quickly, and kind of Preston dismisses it as nothing. Also considering how many of them there are, right? There must be people like that all over the place.
No, for sure. But speaking of that scene, it did bring one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and that was when he holds her up to the mirror and says, do you like what you see? Or I can't remember what the line is. Something like, do you like what you see, or what do you see in the mirror, or whatever. But then he realizes he's looking at himself as well, and he's realizing what he's become is essentially in the regime, and what he's doing to people. And I just thought that scene was great. It's small, it's like easy, not anything mind bending, but I just appreciated it. And just like the way it was acted by Christian Bale, the look in his face, this like slow realization of who he was and what he was doing was just all great for me.
Yeah, and that leads into, like, we've been trashing this movie for 40 minutes now, but I think there's actually one big part of this that really, really works. Like, the gun kata is silly fun, and the aesthetic is a little bit derivative, but it works, right? It gets the point across. But like, I think the reason that this movie has not faded into obscurity, right? Like, it's not just because it's got Christian Bale in it, but the reason I think this kind of stands out from a lot of dystopian science fiction, which the average dystopian science fiction movie is not great, right? It's like the average is not very high, and the reason this one sticks out, I think, is Preston's arc. So I have complained a whole bunch of times in recent months about movies where a character makes a major decision or has some big turning point, but we don't see them make the decision, we don't see them wrestle with the decision, we don't see them agonize over it, we don't see them make a choice. And like, the second act of this movie is that Preston doing this. He gets off prosium, he starts feeling stuff, he begins experiencing the world in ways he has never experienced them, and he goes back and forth, right? He gets very close to going back on the drug at one point and then kind of backs out at the last minute. Like, it takes quite a while until he actually makes the decision to oppose the regime and work with the resistance, right? Like, for a long time, he just wants to live his life in his own head and develop this emotional life. That is, I think, quite good. I think that is better than its script, and that is better than some of its parts. It really conveys this idea of having to hide who you are from the world, from the system, from the government, from the people around you. Like, this is not really something we know, right? But if you've read about what societies like that are like actually dictatorships, people are afraid to even think things, like to even think the wrong things, because it's too dangerous, because the entire environment is set up to kind of trip them up and to kind of look for people who are thinking the wrong way and are doing the wrong things and who might be troublemakers in the future. And he knows this because he's seen the system from the inside, but he then decides to kind of have his own little one-person rebellion, right? Like, initially he doesn't actually want to do anything about it. He just wants to feel. And I think that is quite well done.
And I think Christian Bale really carries it because he just takes you through all of those emotions really well. So, of course, I mentioned the scene in the mirror, but it's the way that he almost slips in, many scenes, but then he has to recover and put the act back on. Even when he's trying to help the rebellion with, the few people that he can save in that particular moment where he's trying to help them escape, and actually created a fun dynamic between, the two of them, where they're clearly very afraid of him and because of him being a cleric, but he's trying to help them. He's almost desperate in the situation because he doesn't want to get caught, and he's like trying to help them, but they don't trust him. And it's got a great line of, if I was trying to shoot you, I would shoot you in your face, not in your back, if he was a cleric. But it was just small things like that, small facial cues, interactions with the different characters, the trying to hide, even that scene where he feels like he's been caught by his son, but then the relief to see that his son was also off of the prosium. Just all of that, Christian Bale really carried the performance, and I think he did a great job with conveying that challenge, that mental challenge, that internal challenge of, now that I've experienced it, what do I do? Do I just go back to what I'm used to, or do I want to like really take the risk and have a life full of emotion? So I think that's probably what carried the narrative aspect of the story, and what carried why I was as invested in the story, was because you're seeing him wrestle with the idea and wrestle with that conflict.
Yeah, and that's a good example of why all of these movies that skip that part are worse off for it, right? Like, that character moment is supposed to be the big point, like the big attraction. It's supposed to be the point of the story. If you don't show it, or if you skip it, or if you cut too many corners, it loses its impact, right? And here we have all of these little scenes that kind of add up to it. Like, one of my favorites is when he's walking to work and he takes off his glove and he feels the coldness of the metal of the handrail. And it's such a mundane and basic emotion or sensation, but to him it's special, right? It's like this is a new dimension to life, right? Or when he, like, one morning, but he's very close to just taking the drug again, and then like the window has kind of been boarded over with like a milky film, right? So he can't look out the window, and so he starts scratching away. I don't even know what to call it, right? But you know what I mean, right? Like the window is blocked, right, by this milky paper, and he scratches it away, and he sees the sunrise, and it's raining, and so there's a rainbow, and he just sees kind of the skyline, and it's raining, and there's a rainbow, and the sun is rising, and all of that, right? So and he's just overwhelmed by a sunrise. Like that makes sense, like on a literal sense, because he is feeling this thing for the first time, but also it's figurative because he is like the regime made his apartment this way. They made it so that he can't look out the window. They made it so that he can't see a sunrise, and he's literally clawing away at the corners of his cage to bring out the natural beauty that even this regime cannot hide. Like even they cannot destroy the sun, right? And so there will always be sunrises, no matter what they do. And all somebody has to do is notice it. So I think like the silly, stupid, pretentious, try-hard edgelord movie from 2002 about the gun cutter like has this little moment in it. And I think that's what elevates it. That's what makes it a little bit more than just a 1984 ripoff.
And even with that, you know how the story's going to play out. It's not a surprise that he completely rejects the regime's ideas, but it's because we've gone on that journey with the character that makes you so invested in the turn, and it makes it so believable, and you're not sat there questioning why he's doing something or why he's making a certain decision, because you've seen him go through the struggle, you've seen him go through that sort of mental gymnastics of what should he do in this particular situation, whereas in another movie might have the character completely do a 180, but they don't show why the character's done a 180, and you're left wondering, you're left a little bit confused as to, okay, that doesn't make sense, and you're just kind of thrust into this next part of the character's journey without seeing the conflict. And even them showing him wrestling with this idea, it adds to the level of threat, it adds to, the danger of him, making this change, because if it was something that was without consequence, then it would be an easy decision. It'd be like, okay, whatever. But because he has to wrestle so much with it, it adds to the threat of the villains in this, the antagonists, some of the people that are in control. It makes every interaction he then has at that point with all the other, enforcers, all the other clerics, it makes it that little bit more tense, because you can see that you're almost like there with him, not wanting to mess up, not wanting to reveal himself. And even in that scene where he's tried to help the rebels, but I believe it's Brand who's toying with him in that scene, because he's kind of observed him. He kind of knows that he probably is feeling, but he's now playing this game with him in there. But it makes that scene even more tense, because you know the dangers that he's putting himself in, and you kind of feel like he's caught. But then they're toying with him, they're playing games with him. He's kind of got him in a trap, but he's letting him free from the trap just to trap him all over again later. It just elevates all of that for me.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Any other thoughts on Equilibrium? Do you see why this is such a classic, like such a cult classic, or is this like early 2000s nonsense?
No, I definitely see why people like it a lot. Again, I like it a lot myself. I definitely see the appeal in it. Strong performances all around in this. I feel like a few different character decisions and a few different, plot decisions, story decisions could have elevated it and could have, propelled this to have maybe one or two more movies after this point. Not that it's, mandatory for it to have it, but it's such an interesting world to be in. One where there isn't emotion, and that immediately speaks to me. So again, I mentioned Handmaid's Tale at the top of this review. It's concepts like that, it's ideas like that, where you're just kind of thrust into this completely random, random world where you have, these people that have this iron fist over society, have these strong rules that can't be deviated from for the people that live in that society, and they're sort of kind of being ruled with an iron fist, essentially. And then it's just like the idea of how do people live in that? How do you escape from that? How do you kind of break free from those chains? So things like that always interest me. I kind of have a bias for things like that. I just kind of wish it was executed a little bit better in terms of its themes, its messaging, and its ideas. And in that sense, it was very bold, actually. I forgot to mention, it was very bold in the fact that it killed some dogs, because I know that's a big no-no of killing dogs and killing children in movies, even though you don't technically see it, and then he does save the dog at the end to maybe appease it a little bit. But I did like that it was bold in that it, killed some dogs, and you could hear dogs being killed.
Like in general, I think like taboos like that just are crutches. It's like, yeah, it's sad when somebody kills a dog, but it's also sad when somebody kills a person. Like bad things can be depicted in a movie as long as the movie doesn't, like if somebody makes a movie in which we cheer at the person killing the dog, then maybe something went wrong. But like this whole, like, no matter, like, you can portray war, you can portray intense suffering, but don't hurt a dog. Like that's, like, I've never understood why that is the line. Like it fits the story, right? Like it didn't have to be dogs, but like this whole idea that all the people in, like, in that particular scene where they raid this resistance group, right, and they've got dogs, like they've got pets, and the people who are on Prosium don't understand why anybody would keep a pet, right? Like they think they like, one of them speculates that maybe the dogs are food, because like none of them have ever had a pet. They've never seen anybody have a pet. The idea of an emotional connection with any other living thing, never mind an animal, is just completely alien to them. And instead of making kind of a big deal out of it, they're just confused. And they kind of talk about it for a minute, about like, what are these people doing? Right? Why do they keep these animals around? And that was probably one of the more subtler touches of the world building. Everything else is pretty much in your face and pretty overt and pretty obvious. But that one was like a little bit, like, had like a shade of subtlety.
No, agreed. Overall, I think very, very enjoyable. Potentially could be remade one day, maybe with, and this is where I support a little bit of adaptation to the story, as long as it's done in a way where the world building feels a little bit more richer and we kind of have a little bit more insight as to sort of some of the dealing. And maybe you tell the story from a different perspective. Again, even though I like the perspective in this particular movie, I do like seeing someone so high up in the system defect from the regime. But even if it helps with the world building to tell a story from a different perspective, it'd be very interesting, because it's just like quite entertaining. I'd wonder if they keep the gun cutter if they actually remade it. But for me, it's kind of what made the movie and what made the action more unique than some of the other action that I've seen, because they could have quite easily done run-of-the-mill action where you had something like The Accountant 2 this year, where it's just run and gun. And it isn't creative, it isn't innovative. You've seen it 1,000 times, and it's just basic, and it doesn't really get you off your seat. Whereas this is at least different. It's a little bit unique. It's a little bit weird, and there's some explanation behind it. There's some, like, ideas behind it, whether it all makes sense or not, whatever. But it's just something different that I hadn't seen before. And obviously, you have examples like The Matrix and stuff. And my recollection of The Matrix isn't as strong, because I haven't seen that in a very long time, but it was just refreshing to not just see someone run and gun.
And there's a bunch of movies like this that kind of mix guns and martial arts from the early to mid 2000s. So this is not the only movie that did this, but sorry, I think it might have popularized the idea.
Can I just say, sorry, actually, the best fight scene, hands down, was the hand-to-hand combat with the guns, where they're just like firing it off, but they're doing like hand-to-hand combat at the same time, and they're letting off the guns and they're missing each other, but they're just like fighting and stuff like that. That scene, epic. That was hands down best action scene in the movie.
And I think it was the only one where they actually mix guns and martial arts, because they're essentially trying to shoot each other, but then they keep blocking and deflecting and dodging as if it was like martial arts. I think that was the only time where that actually happened. Everything else was like this choreographed dance, which is a little bit less interesting. And I think if somebody remade this movie, all they had to really do is kind of add a couple of little scenes that kind of flesh out like how the society works and what people believe about it, both in terms of defectors and true believers, and then kind of make the gun cutter an actual martial art, as opposed to this quasi-statistical analysis, thing where we predict where the bad guys are gonna stand. Like that's kind of the hokey part. If you make it like that fight at the end against Father, where it's actually mixing martial arts and gunfire, it's probably a little bit more compelling. But yeah, I agree that was a really intense one. Like my final thoughts are basically, I think this movie kind of has a lot of weak parts, but it's very earnest. It really believes in what it's doing. It takes itself completely seriously. It's got some good performances in it, and as a result, kind of the thing holds up more than it should. like on paper this should not work as well as it does, but I think it does for these reasons, and because you've got a strong character arc and with strong moments. That's the spine that holds the entire thing together, and that's the thing. Like that's why we care. Like watch most movies like this, and they kind of are missing that, where we really care about the protagonist, and the ones that really have stuck around, that people remember, that really got people excited, are the ones with a strong character in the middle, whose journey as they kind of rebel against the system kind of is compelling enough to keep our interest for the entire time. And I think that is what it really succeeds at.
So I guess that wraps up our conversation on Equilibrium. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What did you think of the movie? What did you think about the points we raised? Did you enjoy the world building in this? Did you feel like the plot was well developed and maybe we were a little bit wrong on that? Or do you agree with what we were saying? Let us know down below. And of course, if you liked everything that we discussed today, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything, maybe tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast. See you later.
Bye bye.